2020 has been an absolute parade of misery, according to my favorite comedy newsman, John Oliver, and some of us I hear share that. The year started with Australia on fire, Kobe Bryant died, and it seemed we were going to go to war with Iran, and that was before COVID, and things got much worse. We've seen mass unemployment, evictions on top of affordable housing crisis I mentioned right here in our backyard. In the broader world, we lost the true king of Wakanda. John Lewis made his final journey across the bridge, and we laid down the pearls of the notorious RBG. We learned about murder hornets, orcas attacking Spanish yachts. Our government was putting kids in cages. This year ruined lives, jobs, dreams, concerts, sanity, mental health on individual and societal levels. We've all experienced this grotesque new wave of police brutality that brought on this national apocalypse around race and the ongoing collusion between white supremacy and power in our land. We had this grim presidential circus that whatever the outcome, we're still sort of waiting. The process divided the country. Some days it feels irreparably. We've seen money in politics, politics in healthcare, civil rights in the courts, and the courts in turmoil. And I don't know if I can even organize the lies enough to call them conspiracy theories. Somebody unmuted, I think. We'll continue. Oh yeah, there it goes. This has all led to unprecedented fear and anger and hate and sadness. And part of what we looked at as we came closer to the holidays is this shift at Christmas whereby we're all just supposed to sort of naturally slide into Emmanuel, God is with us, tinsel lights and warm, happy feelings. And we don't think very honestly about the vulnerability of God with us. And we decided it sort of feels more this year than recently that it's time for an honest Advent, not another opportunity to struggle to force some preconceived religious ideas into 2020 in a way that makes sense. Because for many people, 2020 doesn't make sense, and it doesn't feel like God is with us. It probably feels more like one of Jesus' famous sayings, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that may not make sense, but for many people that feels honest. And so we need that space during Advent for how we feel. And I think especially how we feel when none of this makes sense. We need an Advent that can somehow hold together the hope that God is with us. And we believe that God is with us, whatever we believe about God or a higher power or not. God is with us, and that's complicated. Whatever we mean, we have to hold those together. God is with us, and it's complicated. So that for me, that's Advent. The author Don Cuppett says Christmas is the Disneyfication of Christianity. We've romanticized the story that was you guys have just read these stories. The story that was originally meant as a scathing critique of the Caesars and as a mockery of the powers that be. The nativity stories are written against Donald Trump, effectively. And the nativity story was the ancient equivalent of political shit posting on Facebook. They started celebrating, think about this, they started celebrating Christmas during the reign of Constantine. Constantine was the first Roman emperor to make Christianity mandatory. Mandatory, that's where Christmas comes from. In the European traditions, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, it was already out of control before we ever had Santa, drinking Coca-Cola Classic with the polar bears. The Christmas from the beginning was co-opted by the system, by the powers, by the empire. And so if Christmas is the Disneyfication of Christianity, honest Advent, I'll say, is the 2020fication of Advent or of Christmas, meaning we wanted an honest Advent as the inevitable conclusion to a year like 2020. In the season of Advent, not that's another bow tied up on the target, but the season of Advent that's politically subversive, that's propaganda against the empire. We talk at Advent and Christmas in our congregation, and I think, God, all the more this year, not as much about the divinity of Jesus. We're not preoccupied with how special Jesus is, and that's important. Don't misunderstand me. He's the focal figure, but at Christmas, we're not so focused on how special Jesus is, but rather how human God is. We're not wrapped up in the divinity of Jesus. This is an opportunity for us to connect with the humanity of God, to discover what it means that God is with us in our humanity, in our vulnerability. So the author of this Advent art show that we're going to sort of explore a little, our congregation has opened this up downtown this year. Y'all are welcome to come. I think we open again this Thursday from 1 to 8. So the artist also wrote a book called Honest Advent. He says it like this, about exploring the vulnerability of incarnation. The main idea here is that the place where we connect with the sacred or the divine is through our vulnerability. We see all throughout the Gospels, people connect with Jesus through their vulnerabilities. The teacher Nicodemus says, I don't get it. The powerful Roman centurion who has all of this political power has no power to heal his servant. The sick woman has no power to heal her body. The traitorous Zacchaeus can't find a way back into his own family. And the point is, in the Gospels, with Jesus, the starting point is our vulnerability. The starting point is our weakness, are the places where we're not enough, where we're not doing it right. And if we haven't experienced that in 2020, my God, I don't know what you've done right, but you've done it right. So if we feel like we can and we should still attempt to prop up this Disney-fied version of perfect holiday bliss, and I'm not saying don't decorate your houses and wrap presents, do the thing, but not as an attempt to prop up this fiction. Because if we want that lie more than we want the nasty and raw and gritty human truth that does come with just a flicker of hope, if the way I felt was, if we want that lie, even after all the other lies this year, then I don't know what we can do. Maybe we just have to wait till the scales fall from our eyes, or maybe this news is only for those with ears to hear. But I think we can look at what we've been through and say, God with us is not Disney. God with us, if God is with us at all in 2020, it's not Disney, at least the typical metaphor of Disney. And then I started thinking about that more. God is with us, but it's the 2020 version of Disney. Layoffs and losses and messes where there used to be magic. That's what 2020 is. This is the downfall of the American dream. God is with us, but it's complicated. When I say the downfall of the American dream, I can't help but think about the downfall of Jerusalem. There's a connection between the people who think that God is with them and their folly and their fall. God is with us, but it's complicated. So we're being honest. God is with us, but it's not like to the rescue. It's God is with us like in the shit. God is with us, not to the rescue. You're not getting out of this. God is with us in it. God's with us, but it's complicated. And for us, that had to start with vulnerability. The idea that impossibility is the birthplace of possibility, right? Those are the stories we just read, miraculous birth stories. That's how the story starts. There we have it. God is with us, but it's complicated. And one of the complications is that over and over, the story is that impossibility is the birthplace of possibility. And I know you guys, many of you probably read Brene Brown, so I'm not going to try and preach a sermon on vulnerability. She's already done it much better, book after book. If you're into vulnerability, you got to check out Brene Brown. But as I thought more about Advent, and the story that we've sort of connected with this morning, that things were really messed up at the time, right? Sort of like our world today. Romans were taxing and oppressing people. Jewish clergy were collaborators. Religion had become this rule-bound, stale kind of service. No one was looking after the common man. No one was looking after the common man. Because of the Jewish tradition, there was this expectation that there would be a transformational agent who would fix this. Some people believe Jesus was that agent, although he didn't seem to fit the part. He wasn't exactly that fool character, but he did pretty well with that kind of folklore transformative agent role. And you fast forward to today, and in some sense, we're still expecting a transformative agent. Will that be Joe Biden? What role do we play with or without another agent? That's the question of our communities. That's the question of our personal spirituality. What role do we play with or without this sort of inbreaking of a miraculous agent? And for us at Advent, that's the time to ask the question, is God not just born in that special person, but is God born in us? That's the Advent that we're talking about, how God is born and embodied in the community, in the common good, in the common man. And then what gives us hope that this role for us to play as transformative agents is worthwhile? And this is sort of tongue-in-cheek, but also honest. I mean, how successful was Jesus, given that it's 2,000 years later and we're sort of still in the same boat? And we're sort of still wishing that his wisdom would become manifest. I mean, I want to invite us to consider some images from this Honest Advent Gallery. And again, thanks to Scott Erickson, who's the artist and the author. So I'm going to pull these up and screen share them and offer a little quick reflection for each. And the focus, as Judy was saying in the introduction, is not primarily what we think. And again, 2020 is not the year to try to make sense of things. So you've got your background, you've got your beliefs, you've got the categories that everything fits in, and you're going to see something or hear something and attempt to put it in those categories. And what I'm asking you to do is not to think your way through it, but to ask how it makes you feel. What does it do to you? And maybe, is God in it? Where is God in it? What questions are raised? How does it make you feel? And then we can sort of just slowly reflect through some reflection questions, discussion questions. I'm going to start with vulnerability. Let me see how we're going to do this. I don't know what you're seeing. Are you seeing all of them or just one? Just one image? Perfect. Is it an anatomically correct birth approach?
Pretty much, yeah.
It is.
All right. Okay, so let us consider this for just a moment. The author introduces the image like this. God came to us floating in embryonic fluid, slowly forming and taking shape, embedded in the uterine wall of a Middle Eastern teenage woman it trusted to care for its fragile knitting process. All creating is an expression of vulnerability. We all know people we meet and we like, and we really want to like, but we can't get to know them because it's all good, meaning it's not real. The more you get to know these people, you never get to know them because they never share their skeletons, their secrets, their brokenness, their failure. And you realize that you can't connect as people because without vulnerability, we aren't open to being truly known. And being truly known is essential. Any real connection involves this vulnerability. Not salvation from vulnerability, but sacred presence through vulnerability. We don't get out of it. We finally get that God is in it. Salvation from the pain and suffering and enduring of pregnancy is not to get rid of the baby, to get free from it. It's to get through it, to get on with it. The only way to have a baby is to endure the pain and to know beyond belief or word that somehow mystery, the divine, the sacred source is with in that vulnerability. Amen. All right, let me try and find the next. Oh, this is, I love this. All right, do you see Mary and Eve?
Yeah.
What do you see?
All of us.
Nothing.
I see. Yeah.
That's because I didn't share it. I clicked on mine. Now do you see Mary and Eve?
Now you're cooking.
This is so great. This works with Mary and Eve. It also works with the reading we heard about Mary and Elizabeth. And there's so much here, and I hope you'll spend time with this image in particular if you come to the gallery. It's got a ton of the Hebrew creation story and the connection to Mary's story and everything we talked about with that. The thing that struck me most powerfully was the connection between the vulnerability of the first time experience for Eve, sort of as this first mother in the creation story, and for Mary as obviously this first time mother in quite a situation, knocked up by God, however we want to put that. Talk about God is with us, but it's complicated. What can we learn from the courage of these women in extremely complicated first-time situations? And I think about 2020 and the many first-time situations we've all gone through. And I know I've been in recovery for alcohol coming up on 4 years. And one of the most important parts of my recovery journey is my sponsor's ongoing awareness of when I'm doing something for the first time and how big a trigger that is for me. And I think about the ways 2020 has put us, in many cases, for weeks at a time, every day through another first, whether that had to do with COVID or racism or politics. And I look at this image and I wonder how can we be inspired by the courage of these women in these insanely complicated situations? And to ask, what are our first time situations in this pandemic, post-election, going into this holiday season? I know our family is really struggling with missing each other and isolation and responsibility in terms of whether or not we get together and how we get together, and plans are changing, and we're doing all of our holidays for the first time like this. And maybe a bit more able to be generous with ourselves, with grace for our own first-time situations in the many that this year has had. Maybe that will allow us to find a little bit more grace for others struggling through their own first-time situations. All right, 2 more. Maybe. Stand by. There we go. All right. Are you seeing, I'm going to guess it's like a headdress with a couple people's faces in the middle? Good. This is called Annunciation. And for me, the text that went with this image was the nativity story from Luke. And especially Mary getting the Annunciation from the angel, and the conclusion that Mary was confused and disturbed. And to me, that's both a beautiful image of what happens in the wake of the Spirit, and a really apt description of what it feels like to be vulnerable, confused and disturbed. And I think, to me, the fact that these come together are kind of the sweet spot of Advent and Christmas. That it's not that the Spirit arrives and then we are liberated from what is confusing and disturbing, liberated from what makes us vulnerable, but rather in this story, the arrival of the Spirit is actually the arrival of this confusion, the arrival of that which disturbs us, not always makes peace, and that the arrival of the Spirit in many cases is an invitation into vulnerability, because again, that's where God is born in us. I saw this, and I'm just using this as an example. One of the guys that I follow, these are his words, just because I didn't take time to put it in mine, but you could say this is effectively my viewpoint, and I think it makes the point that I'm trying to make. I would expect at some point in the near future, what we'll see from the new administration is a 4 to 6 week lockdown, compulsory mask mandate. And I think that'll be necessary and sufficient to counteract, hopefully, the surge we're in, or the surge within the surge of the virus, coupled with hopefully some kind of a realistic economic stimulus package to keep people off the street so they don't have to go to work. And I think it would be effective if undertaken collectively. We've seen it work in Korea and Japan and New Zealand and Taiwan, because their shutdowns were undertaken as a unified effort. The people decided to do that. So, and talk about vulnerability and a really painfully honest look at ourselves. I think all of that is possible, and I think that we will not do it. I think that kind of self-limitation is beyond the grasp of bratty, individualistic assholes. And my friend said it like this. He said it like this: the virus has found a key human weakness beyond immune deficiency: rugged individualism, America's Achilles heel. And I don't know if I can put it any more simply than this: real human vulnerability must begin with humility. Some sense that we need each other, and that we actually still have something to learn from this season, from this pain, from this vulnerability. It's the realization that we will be formed. At the end of 2020, we will be formed either way. We can choose to be formed for the better through the things that are really, really hard. And if you think about any good story, the only good conclusion comes after hard times. It only comes after the hard stuff. But it's always the function of our character during the hard stuff. It's how we live through the hard times. And so the question is, what is the conversation that you can only have because of what you've been through in 2020? What's the conversation you can only be a part of because of the way that you're confused, disturbed, and vulnerable? Or maybe what part of your life have you been able to uncover only because you find yourself here? Confused and disturbed and vulnerable. What unexpected place might you encounter God during an uneasy time? And really the question of the gallery, the question for us of Advent is, how do we begin to connect with God coming to us in our weakness, our frailty, our times of uncertainty and brokenness and imperfection? How is our honesty about vulnerability able to help us see God in a new way, or maybe just a fresh way in a difficult time, in a difficult year? I'm going to conclude with this image. This is one of my favorites. And I'm going to read a poem by Caitlyn Shetler. I always mess that up. Not Shelter, Shetler. This is, stand by. There we go. Do you see Mary breastfeeding? Yes. All right. I understand the irony of me reading this as a male preacher. Forgive me, I didn't want to put it on anyone else at the last minute. It's too important and too powerful. So just take a look at the image and consider these words. Sometimes I wonder if Mary breastfed Jesus, if she cried out when he bit her, or if she sobbed when he would not latch. And sometimes I wonder if this is all too vulgar to ask in a church full of men without milk stains on their shirts or coconut oil on their breasts, preaching from pulpits off limits to the Mother of God. But then I think of feeding Jesus, birthing Jesus, the expulsion of blood and smell of sweat, the salt of a mother's tears, onto the soft head of the salt of the earth, feeling lonely and tired, hungry, annoyed, overwhelmed, loving. And I think, if the vulgarity of birth is not honestly preached by men who carry power but not burden, who carry privilege but not labor, who carry authority but not submission, then it should not be preached at all. because the real scandal of the birth of God lies in the cracked nipples of a 14-year-old and not in the sermons of ministers who say women are too delicate to lead. Amen, and happy honest Advent.